track all the changes, whether you're over here, doing something in here, or something over here. The whole enterprise can now be connected, and this is the scenario that we're going to be discussing. So if you think about a product, every one of you is making products. There's a lot of people involved, and a lot of different technologies, authoring tools, silos of information, functional groups, potentially other suppliers, value network partners, and so on. So you have a lot of different people from marketing and product management, architecture, compliance, systems. All these different people are working together to try to make this product. And yet many times there's a challenge in terms of connecting everyone to communicate effectively. So a lot of times, whether you're different sites, different departments, different companies, it can be very challenging to have good communication for everyone. And this is really when you start to add more functional domains beyond CAD, mechanical CAD. I can have electrical, I can have legal, I can have requirements management, all these different things. If they're all disconnected tools, it's going to be really, really hard to do the modeling of all that and understand and have a complete picture of when a change is required, who's impacted. If a change is here, is that the change related to the change that this guy's working on? Is there opportunity here to influence and inform and guide? When they're disconnected systems, it's not so easy to do. This is really what we're talking about here with providing change management on top of the 3DEXPERIENCE platform, because the goal here is to get every single actor, every single stakeholder connected. Not just connected to the platform, but take their authoring tools and connect them in, or give them new authoring tools in the platform depending on what they're doing, and then have one consistent single change mechanism that spans all of those different users and objects and so on. And ultimately, by having everybody connected, now they can clearly communicate that change that needs to be broadcast to all the people involved in that change. You can make sure that all those impacted organizations are now informed, and then you can track what they're doing. This is going to allow for a much more repeatable and consistent process, because now everybody understands what the process is. They're all connected in what they're doing, and now you can start implementing practices, best practices and methodologies, because you now have a framework and a process to do that. Of course, as part of that, because everyone is now connected, the data is connected, the people are connected, the process is consistent, now you can really get full change impact and understand the full scope of all of the children and all of the parents, not just from a single siloed functional group, but an extended functional, cross-enterprise view. And ultimately, you're going to see that there's many different ways this can be implemented in your company. There's choices and options that allows flexibility for you to evolve your change approach or to take a different approach depending on the organization, depending on the project, depending on the data that's working in the project. There's lots of different ways that you can implement the change. Now, generally speaking, the high-level process, if we kind of break it down and look at it from 1,000 feet here, generally you can have an issue or a task. Basically, there's identification of a particular thing that needs to be done. That issue can then lead to an evaluation of, well, what do we need to do to deal with that particular issue that we found? Then there could be a decision to take action. Let's start governing some kind of change that needs to happen in the organization and basically do that. And then ultimately there's the work that needs to be done and implemented. And you see here as I'm creating these boxes, I'm putting different types of objects to control these different levels of governance and work. So issues or tasks, change requests, change orders, change actions. So there's a hierarchy of what's going on here in terms of the work, but when you get to a change action, this is where the work actually happens. And because the 3DEXPERIENCE platform is managing all the actual data and the files and the work being done, this is a very powerful way now to then have all that work be done and eventually approved at this level. And now you've got the traceability to basically close everything all the way back. So the original person that identified all the way through can now be tracked and notified of all the work that's been happening, whether it's one change action or 15 change actions or whatever the case might be. Now in Innovia, how we implement this is through a couple of objects. So as I mentioned, you have an issue. So the whole thing could start with a formal issue. There's an object, issue object. It could be a task. So here's a task. Hey, please go do this. And then you work on it. Change request to evaluate. There's a change request object and some capabilities around that. To govern the actual work being done is a change order. So there's an object for that. You're going to see that in the demonstration. And then the real work being done is, as I mentioned, these change actions. And the change action is really the mandatory piece in here because it's the one that actually provides information. It provides authority to go make changes and revisions and releases and so on. So once an object is under change, the change action is doing a lot of the work. But the other ones here are optional. You don't have to do all of these things all of the time. You can pick and choose. And this is really where we provide flexibility for you how to implement change in your organization. There's 6 ways that this can be parsed. So the first one is what we just showed in the previous slide. Go from issue or task to a change request to a change order and one or more change actions. That's great. What if I don't want to do a change request? I want to just go right through. So you don't need a change request. An issue or task, the result of that could be go right to a change order. Okay, that's excellent. What if there was no issue or task? What if we just wanted to work and evaluate whether we should make a change and go about doing that? Okay, you can do that too. What if you just want to go here? I got a change I need to do, and I want to track all the work being done. It's across different departments. Okay, you can do that. You don't need a change request or an issue. What if I have an issue and I want to go right to the action? You can do that too. And oh, by the way, what if you just want to do a change? You can do that. In fact, we call that a standalone change. So you can do all of these different mechanisms of change. You can do multiple mechanisms of change depending on what it is you're trying to do. It's up to you. Now for the demonstration we're going to show today, we're going to do this one. There's an issue that's created. We're not going to show the task that's being created. That's kind of mundane. But there's a task, and now we want to connect the task to the change order. The change order has to be created and result in a bunch of change work that needs to happen. So we're going to walk through what happens to all these different pieces of the puzzle, what's going on with all the life cycle states, who's approving what, when's the work done, how do we track all this stuff, because it's not just one change that you're working on. You might have dozens of these you're working on, and these changes might take several days, several weeks, depending on what's going on. So you wake up and go into the office any given day, what the heck's going on with these hundreds of change orders that are happening? And how can you make sure they're all getting closed? Well, having a process here, be able to track, you're going to see how that works in this demonstration scenario. So as I mentioned, change management is an option that you can add. Strongly recommend adding it. It's a very powerful option if you want to have good control over what you're doing. But ultimately, as I mentioned, you're going to execute change, but you're going to define what the change is. And you can actually standardize all of this with template-driven processes. And being able to connect all of your functions together and unify that work under that one change management system. So it works on cloud and on-prem. It works on mobile devices because it's web-based, and you can drive all this. You'll see some of that capability on the web-based side. And it comes with a bunch of different apps that get added into your Compass. The main one you're going to see in the demo is change action, because again, that's where the work happens. And the change action, you see here, the little icon is a widget, and the widget allows you to put that on your dashboard. And because there's a lot of work happening, you'll see that widget is very interactive. There's a lot of things you can do with that change action widget to set up and define and work and complete the work that you're doing here. These other apps, which are also widgetized, are really to help report on what's going on. So you're working on 15 different change orders. Well, there's a widget here which kind of lists them out and shows you what's going on and gives you the status of what's happening there. So these are really more of indicators of what's happening. So we're not going to see these in the demo because for the sake of doing one change, we don't need to be showing all that. But you're going to see a lot of this heavy lifting here. And again, just a summary here, connecting all these different organizations. You'll see how the different CAD groups, design groups are connecting on a multi-CAD. You're going to see how manufacturing is involved. You're going to see how product architecture and product management are connecting and working all together in this demonstration. The change you're going to see, it's going to look very similar for every single actor in this demo. Why? Because they're working with changes, change actions, doing their work. It's very, very similar and repeatable there. All right? Because all the data is connected, you're able to do where used, you're able to look at the children, and able to make those assessments and so on, and determine which things need to be added to the change. Traceability is there. You'll see how that is consistently applied, and the digital continuity as everyone works and adds information is there. And that's really where the communication comes in, because it's the same objects that are being shared with everybody. Now we're going to work on a demo assembly. So this is the assembly here. It is a front suspension. It's multi-CAD though. So right here is a caliper. This caliper is 3D Experience CATIA. And one of the things that needs to happen to this caliper is that it needs to evolve. So it needs to be duplicated. So now I have a new object that's in work that needs to be released. And we're going to use the change process to do the releasing of that new evolution. Now we have this anti-sway bar, or anti-roll bar, which is a CATIA V5 component. This is actually already released. What we need to do though is need to revise it. So we want the change process to help us create that new revision, and as the designer does the work and finishes the work, it needs to be approved and released. So the change process will deal with that. Now this other little component here is a SOLIDWORKS component. It's still in work, so we want to track the in-work activity, ultimately approve it, and release it there. So we have kind of 3 different scenarios. Here's a new evolution being done that needs to be released. Here's a new revision that needs to be created, worked on, and released. And here's something already in work that also needs to be released. And the change process is going to cover all of these things in the scenario. Now we've got a few different actors to work out this demonstration scenario, and Naeem and I will trade off and we'll keep you informed as we go through who's doing what. But ultimately there's this person who's responsible for the product. We'll call them the product release engineer, could be the product manager, VP engineering, depending on your company, but they're the ones that are defining what it is that's being done from an engineering perspective. They're the ones that's going to initiate the change and then ultimately do the final release of everything. So they're the full responsible for the product, let's say. Now this engineer that's going to set up this work, initiate the change, is going to require a design change here, which is going to impact and require manufacturing work to be done. So you're going to see how the change order basically is creating 2 change actions that are then going to be worked on. One over here to work on the mechanical design, and then one over here to work on manufacturing. And the great thing about the platform is because everything is connected, manufacturing can begin early. They don't need to wait for all that design work to be completed. They can start working on what they're doing because chances are a lot of this stuff is not new and they just need to put it together and start working on their process planning. Maybe there's some long lead items that they got to start ordering ahead of time. And then as the design work is evolving, they're able to accommodate and deal with those very quickly, very easily. So we can get the manufacturing started way, way early in the process. Now, the architect here, remember this mentioned this is multi-CAD. Well, this architect is going to set up what work needs to be done and ultimately make that available for the various designers to do their work to implement that change. And of course, when it's done, they'll do an approval and there'll be final approvals over here. So that's really the workflow that we're going to go through. What it looks like is like just what I said, but pictorially, and we're going to use this as a map through the demo. We're going to start off, step 1, create the change. Right? There's a need to a change, create the change, attach the things to it, get that change in motion, which is going to create some change actions. Those change action, one's going to go to manufacturing, so you'll see how manufacturing starts their work and what happens to the changes there. Then you're going to see how the product architect works on the mechanical side of that to prepare it. You'll see how the various designers deal with that with their CAD systems to see how that works when they're actually implementing the work. Of course, when they're done with their changes, that has to be reviewed and released by the same guy that set it in motion. We'll see how manufacturing deals with all that and finishes their work. At the end, you'll see the final release through the person that started it all off in the first place. So we're driving digital continuity, but we're also making sure that all the actors are informed and able to do what it is they want to do. Now, we're not going to focus so much on all the different elements in here. We really want to focus on are these change objects and what's happening to those change objects and how they're influencing and affecting all of the work being done. So we're going to also show you what's happening with the life cycle of all of these change objects. So we got the change orders, we got the change actions that are being created, and then we have engineering items to track the design objects in this case, and we have manufacturing items which are being worked on. So what's happening to the states of all these things? Well, first off, you're going to see the change order be created, and it's in a prepare state. As the objects are added for what needs to be changed, that starts to create multiple change actions. Here's the one for manufacturing. Here's the one for engineering. So we see 2 change actions created. Those will also be in the prepare state. Once those things get put to in work, then the work can go down to the people doing the work. So what will happen here is, on the engineering side, because that CATIA file I mentioned, the CATIA v5, that roll bar is released, once this goes to in work, the released item becomes revised and is now in work. And the other objects that are not yet released are also coming along for the ride to say this change action now has 3 real things that need to be worked on for the release. Manufacturing, when they do their work, they're going to create some new manufacturing assemblies, so you'll see that. Of course, the change order is going to be in work as well through this process. The workers will do the work. When they're done, they freeze their items. The items go to a frozen state. That basically means they're done. Nobody else can modify these things. The work is done. And that's a status that's in there to let people know that the design work is complete. Then, because the work is complete, the in-work change actions get put to be in approval, which is basically saying, we're done, the designs are locked, now we're waiting, we'd like you to approve these, please. Now when these things are both in approval, what happens magically here is the change order also changes its status and says, oh, I'm now in approval because all my change actions inside are in approval. So that's something that appears automatically. Of course, these things then get approved. Once those are approved, that means then that the change order can be completed and finalized, final approval and completed. Now, what happens when this is complete is that now the change actions automatically get assigned to complete status. And when the change actions are in complete status, anything that needs to be released from that get automatically released. Okay, so it's not the engineer or the manufacturing guy that releases it. It's happening through the change, which has various approval processes and checks and balances in place. So we're going to navigate this. It's going to take us a little bit as we go through, but we're going to kind of show you the progression through these to make it very clear in terms of what's happening at each step. So for the demo scenario, we're going to start. Naeem is going to play the role of the product release engineer and is going to kick us off with the change order definition.
Okay, so I'm a product release engineer, and I'm going now to define the change that is required in order to complete this process. So I'm going to start by working on a definition of a change order. So as you can see here, I have my dashboard where I am able to define the change order. As you can see, I can use it, I can create a change order directly, and I can define it using a template if I want in order to facilitate the creation of the change, or I can directly fill in manually all the requested information such as the description, reported against, the category of the change, and so on. So in this case, we're going also to add the approver list, and in this list there will be a single approval person, which will be myself, because I'm going to approve the change order at the end of the process. But we need to add it as a approver list, as well as a reviewer list that will be also added here. And now I'm going to define the components which are going to be the proposed changes. So these are the engineering items which I'm going to propose for the product architect to start working on them in order to solve the problem that was reported originally by the engineering. So I'm selecting all of these engineering items and adding them to the change order, and this is going to generate automatically a new change action. And within this change action, these 3 new components or 3 engineering items will be defined under the proposed changes. And at this point, I'm going also to add the front suspension model as another proposed change. This time itself is not going to be modified, but it's going to be added for manufacturing definition purposes. Itself, it's not going to be modified, but I'm just going to add it in order to update the manufacturing definition. So I change the requested change to be for update, so it's not going to be revised or anything. The manufacturing definition will be based on this front suspension engineering definition. So now the next step for me is to assign who's going to work on these change actions. So we have the engineering change action, which will be the full responsibility of the product architect. So that means that I need to transfer the ownership of this change action directly to the 3D product architect. And the 3D product architect will take care of this within his design team. He will need to assign all these assignments to the designers, which is not my responsibility at this case. That's why I'm transferring the full ownership of the change action to this user. And for the manufacturing change action, it will not be owned by the engineering manager, but it's going to be owned by me. However, I will assign him as an assignee to the change action, because he will take care of the manufacturing definition. So it's going to be assigned, and I'm going to be reviewing the work that will be done by this user. So that's why I remove here the assignees, because by default it was me, and I'm bringing now the manufacturing engineer to be responsible for this work. And I will assign myself as the reviewer of this change action. So I'm going to be here assigned as a person who's going to be reviewing that work. Okay. Okay, now the next step for me is to modify the description. Note that this description by default has been copied from the description of the change order. So it's important to personalize, let's say, to modify these descriptions in order to express exactly the target of that specific change action. In this case, it is a manufacturing change action, so we update this description. And then I promote this change action to in work, so that the manufacturing engineer can start working on the manufacturing definition without the need to wait for designers or other design work or engineering work to be finished first, and then the manufacturing work, manufacturing update will start. The last thing I will do now is to attach the change order directly with the collaborative task, which was the original issue that was assigned to me, because this will be the way that I'm telling the person who initiated this issue that the solution for this issue or for this task would be using this, as a result will be this change order that will resolve the issue that was originally encountered in the manufacturing discipline. So what happened now? As we can see, we have here the life cycle, all the states of the life cycle of different objects. We have the change order, we have the change action, we have the engineering items, and we have the manufacturing items. So at this point, once we finalize the first step of this scenario, we have a change order that was created and it was promoted into in-work. We have change actions. One of them, the manufacturing one, has been promoted to in-work for the manufacturing engineer to start working on. We transferred the ownership of the engineering change action to the product architect. However, it is still in prepare, because the product architect will need to define it, to plan the change with his designers. and currently, we don't have yet any update on any of the life cycle of the proposed changes, whether they are engineering items or manufacturing items. So the next step will be to handle this scenario to the manufacturing engineer to initialize the manufacturing BOM definition.
All right, thanks, Naeem. So I'm going to now play the role of the person in charge here. I think my name officially is the Manufactured Items Manager. That's the role. It's a Delmia role that does some really interesting things here. So we're not really going to talk too much about the role, but really show how that role is incorporated into the change process. So this is the dashboard that I've chosen to set up for my particular work. Again, you can tailor this to your heart's content, whatever you need to do. But here on this part of the dashboard, in fact, this is my dashboard here. It's called My Manufacturing Dashboard. Of course, I could have as many dashboards as I want to do different work, different projects, and every dashboard can have different tabs. So here I have one for a bunch of my tasks, and here's manufacturing definition for this particular project. Here's my widget for change actions. There's the change action that's now been assigned to me. So I don't own it, but I have to do the work. So I'm doing the work here. Here's the Manufacturing Items Manager app that's available for me to also to allow me to view the things in 3D. Okay, so what happens? So here's a change action that has been created and sitting here in my widget, and now I can explore. And what you're going to see is every single user now doing the work has the same type of thing. There's a nice description that Naeem created for me. Here's what's being proposed, so he's given me access, and I can drag and drop that. It's on this assembly. Thank you very much. Now I can look at the engineering information. And this is all lightweight on the browser, on my dashboard, no plugins. I can run this on an iPad, wherever I might be. I can start looking at what's going on and how might that impact my manufacturing plan. So I'm aware and advised, and that information came to me. I can drag and drop it here into the app. I can start initializing my manufacturing definition, knowing that I'll be able to update this as the engineering definition changes. So now all my long lead items and other information I need to prepare, I can start to do that now. And basically my work at this point is done, but we'll revisit the manufacturing engineer later to see how all this is incorporated and finalized. So from a perspective of what we happened, when Naeem was done, he was here, and all that's really happened now, manufacturing was in work, and I started my work, just to get you initialized. So now what I'm going to do is hand it over to Naeem, who's going to now work on the engineering plan in terms of the planning for the design work that needs to happen.
Okay, so thank you, Garth. Right, so as a product architect, my job now is to take control of the change action that was assigned to me, and in fact it's under my ownership. So I need to work with my designers to handle to them this design work, and that's what we call the planning of the change action. So let's see what happens here. So when I log into my dashboard, I can see I have here my product structure editor dashboard widget, sorry, and I have here the 3D Compose. So this way I organized my dashboard in a way that it will be very efficient for me to work. On one hand, I'm working on the product structure. I can view it here in the 3D model viewer, and I have also the change action list here available for me, so I can easily take a look at the change and directly visualize it if I need into the 3D Compose. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a look at the change action, and to understand this change action, I can review the attributes of this change action, understanding the description and what was done here. I review also the proposed changes, which were proposed by the product release engineer. And in order to review the full model, I search for it, and then I drag it and I drop it directly here into the 3D Compose. Now 3D Compose is more than a viewer, of course. This is a way to, on one hand, to visualize the 3D model. And as you can see, we can take a look at each one of these components. It is more convenient to maximize it if I need to focus on certain levels of this 3D model. So we can zoom in and out. And we can also use a volume query if we want, in order to highlight certain components within a specific volume of this product structure. Okay, so in this case, I'm taking a look only at specific product or specific components which are within this volume. And at the same time, the system will highlight all these components into the same structure. And from here, if I want, I can browse that into the AnyCAD application. Okay, so now we start assigning the work to the designers. So first of all, I look for the members. I'm going to assign this change action to 3 designers. In this case, it will be the designer who is going to be working with CATIA V5, CATIA 3D Experience, and SolidWorks. One comment here to talk about this change action. We have, as you can see, we have a single change action. It normally could be split into various change actions. Each one will be handled by a different architect or different designer. But for the simplicity, we made a single change action here. And now in order to make it clear for all the designers, I make a description of what exactly we are expecting from this designer. So we define this in the change, reason for change. It's a simple text where we explain to the designer what is the requested change for that specific engineering item that is defined in this change action. So at the end of the day, I have all these descriptions very clear here for everyone who's going to work within the change action. And I'm going to now promote this to InWork, which will deliver notifications to all the designers who are involved in this process. At the same time, if I go to the realized changes, there will be new revisions created for components which were in the released state in the proposed change, which means that now the system prepared all these realized changes to be available for the designers to start working on them. They don't have to do any revise. They don't have to do any life cycle action. They can directly take the assignment from the realized changes and start working on them directly within their corresponding authoring application. Okay, so if we go back to the life cycle states, we've been here previously. And now within, after the product architect has worked on this, on the change action, we see now that the change action that he was owning is now in work. The engineering items now are in work as well. And this will, from here we can go now to the next step, where the designers who have been assigned those tasks can start working on this. Everyone of them will review the change action within his or her own dashboard, and then they will start directly focusing on the change, but at this time their focus will be mainly not in the web, but mainly in the authoring tool, which they are expert at.
All right, thank you, Naeem. So I'm going to play the role of expert in all these CADs because, you know, I'm a rock star with all these things, but that's achieved through a couple of different roles. Because as we mentioned earlier in the webinar, if you're CATIA 3D Experience, okay, there's a native platform role called Mechanical Designer, and many other ones actually, where you can start to work and do the design. But for the file-based CAD, CATIA V5 and SOLIDWORKS, I'm using a different role to bring that data into this model-based change capability and so on, and that's with 3D Component Designer. So one is for CATIA V5, you'll see what that looks like, and then you'll see how I interact through SOLIDWORKS. So the processes are going to be very similar, but they're a little nuanced per the different CADs, and I'll walk you through that. And as Naeem mentioned, there could be a single change action for this one, a single change action for this one, and a single change action for that one. So we can have 3 change actions total if we really want it to be granular and control all that work. But there's an option here to also simplify with one change action that has all 3 things inside, where all these 3 actors are able to then do the work. So you have an option of how you want to govern this. I think that's a powerful capability. So we're going to do the CATIA work in V5, the CATIA work in the 3D Experience platform, and the SOLIDWORKS work. Now, you've already seen how there's dashboards. And the dashboards can be laid out how you want to explore the 3D, explore the product structure. You know, here you see this guy and his change action. He can explore the change action, the proposed changes, the in-work realized changes, which we're going to be working on. You know, the 3D Experience guy, slightly different dashboard. SOLIDWORKS, similar but different. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining that because it's basically always the same. You look at the change action, see what's going on, look at the descriptions, look at the information that's been provided, examine it, open it up into CAD, do your work, save it, and then freeze the work. So let's start with CATIA V5. So there's the change action. Here's the things to work on, as you've seen already several times. But this is consistency, digital continuity, communication of intent. It's the same information being shared with everyone. Of course, you can take a look at the realized changes, which are in work. It's kind of tracking what's happening. And this is where we now need to use the change to authorize us to make the change. So we can see, look, there's the roll bar that we got to work on. Change action told us what to do. And now we got to open this up into CATIA V5. Now you could leave all of this and go into CATIA V5 and do a search, but this is what's really cool with this capability is select what you want to open, go to the compass. Oh, First of all, we got to put it under change. So we drag and drop the change action because the change gives us the authority to make the change. Then we click on Open in CATIA, and then here it is in CATIA. And by the way, the CATIA knows that there's a change here, so it's tracking. Everything that happens here is being now tracked by the change. So, okay, I'm really fast, it's done, and now we're going to save this back. And again, it understands that thanks to working under that change, hey, here is the change that's happening, and it now saves it back. Now, the work's not quite done, the design work is done. We need to just go back into the platform and freeze this thing. So we're going to go ahead and go back into the dashboard. We can refresh it. You can see here that it's purple. Thanks, we changed that color. Now we're going to go over to the compass and say Launch Collaborative Lifecycle App, which now gives us the ability to change lifecycle statuses. And again, we just have to say we want to do this under the authority of this change. Go ahead and click. We want to freeze that thing, and that will promote that up to frozen. And by the way, that promotion also is tracked by the change. So we know there was a modification. We know there was basically a new iteration created, and we now know that it's been frozen. And all that was tracked under that change. So now let's see what it looks like here with 3D Experience CATIA. So again, we'll start with the dashboard. A little bit different here. We've already loaded up for you. Basically now click here and open it up into CATIA 3D Experience. You can browse it and so on. Now, CATIA V5, you had to go under Change first and then open CATIA V5. Here, we can open this up into CATIA 3D Experience, look around, and then say, hey, now I'm going to work under Change. It's a little bit different workflow, but the options are basically resulting in the same outcome. You want to do a work under this change, click that down arrow, work under, and see this little box. Now it's like a recorder. It's recording everything that's being done. And again, I'm awesome. It's fast. We're done. Now we want to save. So again, we do an advanced save just so you can see again that it's tracking. There was one object change. But if there was 2 objects changed, 5 objects created, whatever it is I did, it would be here and tracked by the change for release. So I want to double check my work, hit OK. Now I want to freeze the design. Well, because I'm in 3D Experience CATIA, my compass is inside of CATIA. Here it is. I can go to the life cycle here. I'm still working under the change. And now I can do the promote. And I'll get out of the way, and you can promote there. So that's the CATIA 3D Experience. It's very similar, slightly different workflow because the application is more directly connected on top of the platform, but it's same outcome. Examine the data from the change action, take a look at it, load it up into CAD under change, make the change, freeze the object. Same thing in SOLIDWORKS, again, slightly different. So we'll start again on the dashboard where we're going to just go right into CAD. So here we are, SOLIDWORKS item. Now we're going to launch that into SOLIDWORKS. We'll just skip right to the chase here. But again, obviously you're browsing and looking and doing all those things that we've already shown 5 times. Same process. So here it is in SOLIDWORKS. And we can watch the SOLIDWORKS user tumble this around a little bit. But right here is the SOLIDWORKS. This is really the gateway here now to the 3D Experience platform. And all the information that's in session is here. And there's a lot of tools here, just like kind of you saw a little bit of those in 3D Experience CATIA. Those are now right here inside of SOLIDWORKS. So a couple things we got to do is we want to make a change. So we've got to tell the system, hey, start tracking what I'm doing here now under that change action. Right? Now the recorder is on. It's tracking all the work. It's granted me the ability to make the change. And you know what? I'm just also going to reserve this or lock it so no one else can muck around with this while I'm working on it. All right? And because, again, I'm super fast in CAD, boom, I'm done. And, okay, save. Right here from the menu. Okay, again, you get a little summary of what it is that's being modified, so you can double check that. Again, it was a simple modification, but if I had added more components in an assembly and so on, all that stuff will be tracked by the change. Do the save. The other thing I got to do is what? Do a promote. Right there, still working under the change, so the change is now knowing and giving me the authority to promote this thing. Okay, so the workflows are very similar across the different CAD systems, but they're a little nuanced depending on the CAD. But the outcome and the result is ultimately the same thing that you need to do. Now, because there was one single change action and all 3 CAD designers were working, the realized items in that change action are now all frozen. So the last guy who took the longest time, let's say, you can go in to the change action and say, I'm going to put this into approval. All right? Now obviously if everyone had their own change action, each one would approve their own change action. In this case, they're all working together under one, so last guy loses, he gets to promote that thing when he's done. So where are we at? So we just did all the work, we froze the items, and we put the engineering change action in approval. Okay, so we did that, and we did that. So now I'm going to give it back to Naeem, who's going to approve all that work and take us on to the next step.
Okay, so as a product architect, I'm going to review the work that was executed by the three designers in CATIA V5, SolidWorks, CATIA 3D Experience, and I'm going to make decisions based on this work, if I'm going to validate that or reject that. Again, knowing that I'm not a designer, I don't have normally any CAD application installed, so I'm going to rely on the web to do this validation. Okay, so I log into the dashboard. This is again the change action, and this is where I see all the realized changes. Now the good thing is that I don't really need so much communication with the designers directly, because realized changes have captured all the work that was done by the designers, whether if they have added data or they have promoted or they have removed maybe certain data from the product structure. Visually speaking, I can review that within the 3D Compose. I see there is a new color here for the anti-roll bar. I see there is a new hole that was designed in SolidWorks. That was the requirement. And I can see that for the caliper, there is a new part that was added to make it also thinner. So this gives me an indication that the work was correctly done. And then all I need to do to approve that is simply to go to the change action itself, approve it by adding a new comment and finalizing this change action. So this means that this change action now becomes approved. So it changes its state. And if we go back to the life cycle, this was the state before the approval of the change action. In fact, the change action that is engineering related has been now promoted to approved state. Nothing else happened. We still didn't work with the manufacturing, and all the items, in fact, are still in the frozen states. So the next step is now to see how the manufacturing engineer is going to restructure and build the manufacturing definition in parallel or after the design has been validated. So we're going to see this, how this is done also within the authority of the change action that was assigned to the manufacturing engineer.
All right, thanks, Naeem. So now I'm back as the manufacturing engineer, which you saw me early on starting to the process and dealing with my long lead items and starting to build out my manufacturing definition. We're not going to go into all the cool things that you do here to work with that. In fact, we've got another webinar that goes into a lot more detail here. But again, as Naeem said, we want to show how that's working underneath the authority and tracking of this change action that was assigned. So here is the dashboard again, things that are going on. You notice here that I've done some more work. I've done some, going to start to do some restructuring, and I have access to the latest design work always that's being worked on. So first what we need to do, just like before, is we got to work under the authority of change. So that little hard hat icon gives us the authority and starts tracking our work. And then, okay, I'm also awesome manufacturing engineer, so presto, I'm done my work. I've done my reordering and preparation. But I don't own this change action. I'm an assignee. So all I can really do here is say, I would like to approve this. But again, just like engineering, I've got to freeze my manufacturing items. So the manufacturing items that are being done are also frozen, just like the design items are being done and frozen. So I'm going to freeze my items that I'm done. So all those things are ready to go. And then I can go about saying I would like to go and approve my stuff here. Okay? So here's all the realized changes that the change action is tracking. The things that I've been working on are now all incorporated here into this. They're all at frozen state. And click the button, it's in approval. Now Naeem will get notification that I'm done my work, and he can go about doing his approval. So where are we at now? We saw in the last step how the engineering stuff was done and approved. So here I've gone and you saw I froze my objects and I put my change action in approval. But something also happened that's pretty cool is the change order is kind of watching all this stuff and controlling everything. And because all of the change actions that are inside that change order are now at the in approval state, the change order automatically changes to say, oh, I'm in approval, because everything, all of the change actions are in approval. So if you're up here monitoring the change actions, you can start to see where things are at, because in approval basically means the work is done and ready to be approved, or it's in the process of being approved. So at a high level, you're not doing much other than just tracking that this work is being done, and at some point you're going to have to do the approval. So this is now where we're going to switch and have Naeem come back and act as the release engineer and go do the final review on the manufacturing item, and then go about releasing the rest of the change actions and change order.
Okay, so this is the final step of this demo scenario. This is where the release engineer, product release engineer, is going to look at the final work. He is going to make decisions on the level of the change order based on all the work that was done within each one of the change actions. Remember that we have two change actions. One is engineering related and one is manufacturing related, and based on these results I'm going to decide how to validate the change order. Okay, so I'm logging to my dashboard. Again, we have here the list of all the change actions that are assigned to me. I have here the viewer, and I have here the engineering definition, and I have organized or grouped this engineering definition at this point per lifecycle state. And we can see that in the frozen, I have all the engineering items that have been frozen by the users who were working in the change actions. In order to view them, I simply drag and drop them directly into the 3D play in order to understand what was modified by the designers. And again, all the design work has been completed here, so we can see, for example, the caliper here. The change was performed on the level of the thickness, so it's very clear from within this 3D play. We can also see the new color of the anti-roll bar. That was also the requested change. And we can also review the new modification that was done on the pivot that will show the new hole that was added. All of this in order to improve the performance and to resolve the issue that was originally defined by the manufacturing. Okay, so every time I highlight this here, I can see this component highlighted at the same time in the 3D play. So this way I'm sure that the component that has been originally added here from the change action is correctly highlighted, and this is exactly what I'm looking at right now. So this helps me to make a decision how I'm going to proceed with the validation of either the change action and later on with the change order. So first of all, I'm going to take care of the change action that was assigned to the manufacturing engineer. And I can see within the proposed changes all the new manufacturing items that have been added here, and the manufacturing engineer in fact has worked on them in order to restructure the manufacturing definition. And then I promote it to approved at this point. And then I define new comment in order to finalize the approval process of the change action. At this point, the change action becomes approved. So remember, previously we had a change action of the product architect. He was fully responsible for it. It's approved by him. I have now approved the manufacturing change action, so I go back now to the change order that governs both of them, and it's automatically approved. It's automatically in approval process because all the change actions under beneath it are all approved. Okay, so at this point I can review the content, the proposed changes again, and I can now completely finalize the process by approving the change order. And again, the same process here. I need to define a comment as part of this approval process, and to finalize this the complete change. And as a result of this, there are many things that will happen after this approval process. So it's not just the change order, but also this has an impact on the change actions and also the content of all these change actions. Again, we have the manufacturing and we have the engineering change actions, and everything will be finalized after the approval of the change order. So the change order becomes now complete. This is the first impact. Okay, and if we go back to the change actions, you can see here also the change action, at least one of them, we see here it's in a complete state, and also all the realized changes are also now completely released. And we can see this if we group the engineering definition list by the life cycle state. Okay, so this finalized the full demo, the full process. And if we go back to the life cycle state, as we can see here, that was the step before we promoted or before we completed the change order. And at the end, everything is green, everything is finalized on the level of the change order, on the level of both change actions, and we have released both engineering definition and manufacturing definition. And this is exactly the role of the product release engineer. Responsibility to not just to make the engineering definition, but also to finalize and validate the release process from the beginning until the end.
All right, thanks, Naeem. So we've gone through the whole scenario. Looks like a lot of steps. When you think about how it's organized in the hierarchy of what's happening, it's really not that difficult to understand at all. You know, you start with the work that you want to do. So let's create a change order, put the work and the impacted items, the things you propose for change. That then creates the necessary change actions that go to the people that are going to do the work. In one case, manufacturing. In one case, the product architect, who's then saying, okay, I have multiple designers. Let me spread the work out to the multiple designers. The designers get their information. They do their work. They freeze their objects, put that change action into approval or in approval. Change action then gets approved. Manufacturing work is done. Request for approval. And then you go ahead and the release engineer who started everything now finishes, does the final approval, the final closing of the change order, which then cascades all the completeness and releasing of everything inside. So there's many different scenarios, as we talked about, where you can manage change. This is the one that we did right here, the task, the change order, the change action, actually two change actions here. But as we said, there's many different ways you can do this. You could have this change request piece inside and kind of have a change control board making decisions. You can not have the issue and go straight through. You can just do change actions. So whatever it is you need to do to manage your process, you have that flexibility. We really think that change management, given this flexibility, you want to do something quick? Go. You got to govern it. You've got the process in place. You have everything you need to do whatever level of quick ad hoc change or very controlled formal change process. It's all here in the platform once you add the change management option. So as we said, bring everybody together, all departments, all functions that are working, all the information, the data is there in the platform, and now you've got a common change engine and process to go through all that. That's going to drive the communication. You saw how the change action has all the information and the data for the person to do their work. It comes to them. Here's your change action. Thank you very much. Do the work. I'm done, give it back. That's going to drive a lot of consistency in the organization. It's going to allow you to repeat those changes in a controlled way. As Naeem said in the beginning, you can templatize the process as well, and that's really starting to give you a handle and manage some of these things as you're working. We didn't do a lot of this, but it's pretty simple if you've seen other demos that we've done. When you have all the information, you can start to explore the relationships. And you can explore the relationships down the children, you can explore the relationships on the parents, and you can explore the different types of relationships to really gauge the assessment of change. There's actually a tool that can help do all that for you, or you can explore yourself and manually add. It's really up to you. So there's a lot of capability once everything is connected for you to be able to manage that. And then as you saw, there's flexibility in how you deploy this. You can control that. You can use multiple options depending on the functions and the groups that you're working with. So that's the end of the webinar. We really appreciate you joining us.